So, I'm not really exaggerating when I say I went through several different scripts on how I was going to cover this game and this topic. I've gone back and forth over and over again as to whether or not this was going to be a positive video or a negative one. I've gone back and forth on if I should just make a video capsuling, my angry, visceral first impressions, or just make a long, detailed video talking about this as a whole, and then release it in a few weeks. Hell, even as I write this version, I do have ideas and thoughts that are just kind of scrambled all over the place. So with that said, as of recording this now, I decided, you know what, I'm going to stop writing this. Let's just go with what I've got now. It's probably going to come off as, disjointed and rambly, no real end goal and purpose, but I wanted to make a video that captured both my initial frustration I had with this game and how I just, instinctually felt insulted by it as a fan, but also, gonna be totally honest, swallowing my pride and realizing that maybe something good can come out of it. And I will preface this video by saying, there's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying this game and really liking it, because a lot of people are. But I don't think there's anything wrong with just being immeasurably disappointed with it. In my case, it's both. I fucking love F-Zero. Everyone's got their favorite Nintendo series, right? Everyone loves Mario, everyone loves Zelda, everyone loves Kirby, and if you don't love Kirby, you're a fucking monster. We've all got our favorites. Maybe you love the atmosphere and the exploration of Metroid. Maybe you love the absurdity of something like WarioWare. Or maybe you love the simplicity of something like Wii Sports. Maybe you're a Pokemon fan and hate your own franchise like 90% of the time. I should know, I've hated it since 2005. But if you were to ask me personally what my favorite has always been, through and through, most who know me personally would probably assume Metroid. And while that's definitely true to a certain degree, I do fucking love me some Metroid. F-Zero has always been my favorite. Ever since I was a kid and picked up GP Legend on Game Boy Advance for the first time, I've always loved this franchise to death. The colorful cast of characters, the over-the-top and wacky universe that they live in, the high-octane racing, the fast-paced kinetic soundtrack, the adrenaline-pumping risk and reward style of gameplay, I've loved it all. The original F-Zero on Super Nintendo still holds up pretty well today. Mostly, I'll get to that later. And it's probably my personal favorite game on the Super Nintendo. F-Zero X cranks that idea up to 11, what with the 3D graphics and even more racers and techniques to play around with. Not only that, but you also have the addition of stuff like Death Race and whatnot. This is still easily my favorite Nintendo 64 game. Maximum Velocity for Game Boy Advance is, okay, this might be the only bad one. GP Legend still holds up, not just because it's a childhood favorite of mine, but because it's genuinely the best racing game on Game Boy Advance, at least one that released worldwide. It's this classic style of F-Zero at its absolute best, with the same cast of 30 plus characters and machines to race with just like an F-Zero X, the best story mode in the whole series, and all of its challenge and time attack modes. Climax takes us a step further with even more improvements, more tracks, more machines, and even a freaking track editor. The best of the bunch though, F-Zero GX. Tied right next to Metroid Prime for my favorite on the GameCube. If F-Zero X cranked things up to 11, this game cranks it up to fucking 11,000. The breakneck speed is insane. One small deviation or screw up could send you flying off the track. It is genuinely one of the most intense games I've ever played, but that skill gap it has, from using its in-game techniques, from spin attacks and side attacks and whatnot, to its exploits like snaking, which I'll just be totally honest, I'm pretty bad at. This skill gap is one of the best in any game I've ever played. That's my point. Like, you're good at racing games and just gaming in general if you've mastered the kind of game F-Zero GX is. And not only that, but it also has its own story mode, which, being totally honest, is a little too breakneck. Like, Jesus Christ, this shit goes hard, but it's also so fucking hard. It has custom machine parts to create your own vehicles. It has a companion arcade game called F-Zero AX, which not only had tracks of its own, but back then, in the mid-2000s, gave you exclusive items if you had a memory card. Kinda sucks I wasn't around to really, experience that. But still, if you haven't gotten the idea already, I fucking love this series a lot. So it should go without saying that I've casually hoped and wanted for a new game for years, ever since Climax came out. I knew it was completely unlikely, but every single time a Nintendo Direct would pass, I would hope for something. Even seeing F-Zero in passing from stuff like Super Smash Bros., or even just seeing the classic games get put on Virtual Console or Switch Online, that was more than enough for me. It sort of became an in-joke for a while among most of my friends, that every single Direct, I would hopelessly hope for something F-Zero related. I followed stuff for it like a hawk. I was there when a Wii U game was supposedly being made by Criterion, which turned out to be total bullshit, unfortunately. I was there foaming at the mouth when Nintendo said that they were shocked that there was a demand for F-Zero and just didn't know how to move forward with it without innovating. I was that person who spent $40,000 in stock just to ask Nintendo if they would make another game. Okay, that actually wasn't me, but how funny would it be if it was? I would have been okay with almost anything. A new game, even if that was likely off the table at this point. A localization of Climax maybe, even if that was less likely than Mother 3. A remaster or a port of GX with online racing, that would have been more than enough. And I think I speak on behalf of, most F-Zero fans, that would have been more than enough. Then this Direct came by. Nintendo did their traditional take a look at this moment. The startup and music for Mute City and F-Zero played, and I started losing my shit. Was this it? Is this finally happening? Are we finally getting something new after all these years of wanting and patiently waiting?
Returns as a 99-player battle royale. F-Zero 99.
Dude, my reaction to this was fucking visceral. Like, pathetically visceral, dude. You have no idea. Like all this time, all this waiting, and this is what we got. Like, needless to say, I was pissed. And it's not like I hadn't seen, disappointing and downright disrespectful things from Nintendo before when it came to handling their lesser-known franchises like this. Metroid Prime Federation Force immediately comes to mind as a Metroid fan myself. And though I'm not a big fan myself of some other Nintendo franchises or sub-series, I've felt the disappointment that comes with announcements for stuff like Paper Mario Color Splash or Chibi-Robo Ziplash, and even upon release for games like Star Fox Zero. This felt different, not just because it wasn't a GX remaster, not because it wasn't a Climax localization, not because it wasn't adding GP Legend to Game Boy Advance Online, not even just because it was F-Zero in general. In the moment, I felt like it was the most disrespectful thing Nintendo could possibly do to any of their franchises. And to a certain degree, I honestly kind of still feel that way, and I'll get into why in a bit, but let's just talk about the game itself first. So, here's the thing. F-Zero 99 is actually not that bad. It's actually pretty alright, and it can be a decent bit of fun at times. There's a workshop where you can customize the 4 vehicles from the original game. There's player cards you can make with cosmetics and badges you can unlock for reaching different achievements or from leveling up. In addition to leveling up, there's a skill progression system where you can rank up or down depending on how you do in races and if you beat certain rivals, just like the rival system in previous games. There's clearly effort put into this. Honestly, a lot more than I or probably anyone else expected. That being said, this game still has the same design quirks and flaws the original F-Zero on Super Nintendo had. It still plays and controls really dated, and there's no way to really change or adjust your controls, the latter of which kinda sucks, and it took a lot of getting used to this control scheme. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker. At least that's what I initially would have said before going back to play the original game again after this came out, and yeah, I love this game, but it is not aged well. The original game has a decent bit of glaring flaws with it. The game is hard, like F-Zero in general is hard, but this game can get downright unfair with how dated some of the design choices are. Recharging your machine in pit areas absolutely sucks because it's always on a delay and not as soon as you hit these pit areas of each course, so you never get back as much power as you want, or more importantly, need. This game loves to pull you in every direction possible. If you bump into another machine, well, congratulations. There's a good chance you will keep getting pulled over to it like a magnet. It feels like there's this constant traffic flow because there's always barriers on the course, so there is a good chance you will bump into something. And it's not like in the other games, well, yeah, it happens because the game is hard. Nah, in F-Zero, it'll happen eventually, even if you have the course down perfectly, because there is a very high chance another vehicle or a bumper could be right in your most optimal path and throw you off course or slow you down. It can be really, really, really clunky at times, sometimes even frustratingly so. Most everything else still holds up. The game still looks great, the soundtrack is iconic, the tracks are very well designed despite the inherent flaws with the gameplay itself. And I bring this up because, that all having been said, comparing the two now, It's actually nice how much better F-Zero 99 is to play. It controls much smoother and better, the tracks are significantly bigger and wider to accommodate the higher player count, there's no more delay whenever you go into pit areas to recharge. Instead of having the individual boost mechanic from the original game, it just pulls the boost mechanic from your power meter just like every other game, except maximum velocity. And since there's so much chaos, it really doesn't feel as awful if you run into oncoming traffic, both, barriers and just regular players. So that probably begs the question, if I am enjoying certain portions of this game, despite the clunkiness, despite some flaws here and there, what is my inherent problem with it? It's a 99-player battle royale game. Everything that makes F-Zero fun and great is here. There's risk and reward for going high speeds and boosting with your energy meter. There is still a chance you could fly all over the place if you make one wrong tight turn or go careening off the track, whether that's accidental or if you're just a dumbass like I can be sometimes. It's that same adrenaline rush the other games have, but then you have 98 other players doing the exact same thing. There isn't really a skill gap here, at least one that isn't very present because of the inherent design of the game. Just like the original game on SNES, it is luck-based half the time if you even perform well in a race, because instead of actually racing, you're just trying to survive. Not survive while playing that risk-reward style that F-Zero is known for. No, it's just pure survival. And you might be thinking something like, well, they did that with Death Race and X on the 64, and yeah, you're right. But I don't want to play Death Race, I just want to play regular racing. Boosting isn't really a viable option for moving up in the ranks in this because it is so easy for 4 or 5 other players to just keep smacking into you back and forth over and over again, which can destroy you in a heartbeat. They did add the spin attack, but not only is it on a charge and you can't use it whenever you like an X or GX, it doesn't even help with maneuvering or turning that much. It basically only exists to help you get these little gold coins, I totally forget what they're called here, to get you on this new skyway easier, which is an actual necessity if you want to climb the ranks in a race. Granted, it is a nice touch, and it is a pretty well designed mechanic to help you get out of whatever rut you're stuck in with 20 other people, but it would have been nice if the spin attack just had more utility than this like it did in X and GX. The most fun I've had with this game so far was the Grand Prix mode, but the issue is that it doesn't become an actual test of skill until the last and/or second to last race. Almost like they figured out 2 decades ago that having 30 players max for this kind of racing game was the most optimal and fun way to play this series. And even then, because it's a battle royale, if you fuck up at any moment before the last race, you have to wait hours before you can play another Grand Prix and spend more tickets on it. Not to mention that, at least at this point in time, the only way you can unlock the tracks for practice mode is by playing on them at least once first. And if you want certain cosmetics or badges to play it in practice mode, which acts as this game's time attack mode essentially, or even to play the track in the first place outside the main game at all, you have to play them first. This mostly isn't an issue right now. Most of the tracks you can easily access by playing the game naturally, but currently, playing Grand Prix and making it to the final round is the only way you can unlock Silence, which is pretty difficult when 98 other people are trying to do the exact same thing. Is this exact same thing going to happen if or when they release the harder Grand Prix from the original game? F-Zero is already a difficult game by itself, but competing with 98 other people just to unlock later tracks to play Time Attack on sounds like utter hell. I mean, I guess the same can still be said about unlocking stuff in past games. Like, just look how difficult it is for even speedrunners to complete GX's story mode on very hard so they can unlock more parts and racers. But this method of unlocking tracks feels less like an actual challenge and more like a handicap because of how the game is inherently designed. Just like the original F-Zero game. F-Zero has always been chaotic, yes, that is true. But it's always been controlled chaos. And like I said, that's why the 30-player max count worked in games like X or GX or GP Legend. This game is just complete chaos. There's no control whatsoever. I don't dislike this game, but at the same time, Maximum Velocity is the only other game I can safely say I liked less, and that's kind of a low bar. So many of the game's flaws can either be traced back to having this Battle Royale format, or just inherent flaws that carried over from the original F-Zero. This classic style of F-Zero was perfected in GP Legend and Climax. Why not just asset flip one of those games? You'd have more racers, better driving mechanics, more tracks, a more polished soundtrack and presentation. Again, at times there is fun to be had here. Mini-pre's are a moderately fun time, again, at later races. There's this new team-based mode that's a ton of fun, especially since you can actually boost when only half of the racers bumping into you can actually damage you. And like, in some ways, that's kind of the most frustrating thing, is like, you know, there is effort put into this. So why blow it on a design model that has only worked once out of the 4 times Nintendo has done this so far? Look, Tetris 99 is the only one of these that actually worked out, but that's because it's Tetris. Anybody can and will casually play that, regardless of the way it's presented. Mario 35 was discontinued, and Pac-Man 99 is about to get the same treatment. The last 2 directs, as well as insider leaks and info, are pointing towards Nintendo's next console coming out late next year. It is actually insulting, considering all of this, that F-Zero 99 even exists, let alone to put it on the console when it's this close to the end of its life cycle. Is this game going to continue getting support in the future after the rest of the tracks are added? Will it migrate over to Nintendo's next console? Is this game safe from Nintendo deciding to pull the plug and discontinue it after like a year when not many people left are playing it? The answer is very likely no to all of that. This isn't really a new game in the series, it's an asset flip of the original game. This is Nintendo's way of testing the waters to see if there's still interest in the series, and if or when the game starts to inevitably lose players as time goes on, just like with every other game where they didn't read the room, they'll just use it as an excuse and think, oh, I guess no one wants F-Zero anymore. Just like they did Chibi Robo, just like they did with Star Fox after Zero came out, and just like they almost did with Metroid Prime if the backlash against Federation Force wasn't big enough. I really do not understand why Nintendo does this so often and deliberately sabotages their lesser-known franchises like this, despite how fans of said franchises make it very, very clear what they actually want and hope for. And like, we were reaching a point where we weren't even really asking that much. Like, a new game is off the table at this point. We know Nintendo's probably not gonna let that happen. Why do you think the vast majority of fans wanted, you know, I'm gonna get it right here, hang on. Like, why do you think the vast majority of fans want a remaster of this game and nothing else? Like, how telling is it that the things fans want most is a remaster of a previous game like this because they know Nintendo's just not gonna make another new game? It fucking sucks. Now, that having been said, there was a lot more pessimistic things I was going to initially say in my first few drafts of the script. Like, so much so that I was actually planning on going online to see how other people were reacting, and I'm gonna be honest, to my surprise, people are actually liking the game. Like, a lot. Like, this is the most I've ever seen people talk about or play F-Zero than I ever have before, and a lot of it is pretty positive. Yeah, there was that initial reaction of, what the actual fuck is this? But after having it settle for a few days, people are sharing clips from their wins in the game. They're sharing tips and techniques on how to perform better. They're discussing which machines in the game are best to use. Spoiler alert, it's a fire stingray and don't even touch the golden fox. Yep, this is definitely the original F-Zero. As much as I don't want to swallow my pride on my initial negative thoughts on this game, the reception honestly speaks for itself. Everyone's really loving F-Zero again. And you know what? That's a nice thing to see. I honestly wasn't expecting this reaction at all. Hell, based on how they've treated F-Zero in the past, I think Nintendo is just as equally shocked, if not more so. Probably shocked enough that maybe they realize F-Zero needs to make a proper comeback now they realize people still care enough about this series. Calm down! But while I'm loving the better reception the game is getting now, how much people are talking about it, and how I was wrong to a certain degree on this game, there's still a bittersweet feeling about it. I'm glad F-Zero is making a comeback in some form, but on the other end of the spectrum, you still have to remember, this isn't exactly the comeback we were hoping for. People are playing this, and that's great. But this is just evidence that Nintendo didn't need to, quote-unquote, test the waters for a new game. That demand has been there for over 2 decades. How is it now, after they put out this experiment, that Nintendo is realizing there was already demand? Imagine if people were having this kind of discourse about a brand new game. Imagine if F-Zero GX got the remaster treatment similar to Metroid Prime, and people could buy and play it as soon as the direct was over. Imagine this reaction happening to an objectively much better game. Again, it's bittersweet. The whole idea of F-Zero 99 still reeks of the same tone-deaf games Nintendo has released before. Look, Federation Force was poorly timed. Nobody asked for Chibi Robo Ziplash. Nobody wanted Paper Mario to go the direction it has ever since Sticker Star. Nobody wanted an Animal Crossing Mario Party knockoff that requires a $13 figure just to press a button per player. But here's the thing about these games. At least all of these were actual games that physically released. Federation Force and Ziplash had physical cartridges. Amiibo Festival was on a Wii U disc. the Paper Mario games are still treated like a big deal when it comes to releases. Star Fox Zero had a massive marketing push and campaign behind it. As much as these games did not do well, they were still full-fledged games, meaning Nintendo clearly wanted to put some sizable effort into them, even if they were misguided. They knew people cared about these franchises enough to make these kind of games. F-Zero doesn't even get that. Instead, what we got is an online multiplayer version of the original game that did not take up that many resources to make or put out. And of course it's an ass to flip with the first game, because God forbid Nintendo actually acknowledged something for F-Zero outside the first game or Captain Falcon and Smash. I'm glad it has been a success so far, but only time is going to tell if Nintendo decides to truly invest this game, or even the whole series now, and doesn't discontinue this 99 game like they did Mario 35 or Pac-Man 99. F-Zero, in principle, deserves more and better than this. It deserves a real chance at a proper comeback. It deserves that GX remaster. Hell, after 99's success, there's no way Nintendo can ignore that anymore. Some people might watch this video and think I'm being overly dramatic about this. Say something like, at least we got something. And on one hand, yeah, you're right. I am glad that this game exists. I'm glad it has people talking about F-Zero again. I'm glad it might be making Nintendo realize, oh shit, maybe people actually do want a new game, even though we've been asking this for 2 decades now. Because at the end of the day, it is just a video game. As much as it would suck to see this franchise go into limbo again, and as much as I would hate to see that happen, it is just a video game at the end of the day. It's not the biggest deal in the world. But on the other hand, why should we settle for less when we know F-Zero is more than this? F-Zero is about that high-octane, high-speed racing. It's about its colorful and goofy cast of characters. It's about its heart-pumping soundtrack, the immaculate track design, and its planets and visuals. It's about the risk-reward style of gameplay that set it apart from other racing games at the time, and still separates it from racing games today. It's about that high skill gap and achieving that high skill gap for a game that can be ball-bustingly hard. Why do you think people still ask for a new F-Zero specifically, even though there's all kinds of other futuristic racing games out there that could be considered alternatives? F-Zero 99 has moments like that, but it's all through a filter of a genre that at worst feels exhausted by this point, and at best has much better alternatives when it comes to the Battle Royale gameplay loop. Those things that make F-Zero special are here, but they can't shine when they're clashing with a genre that dissuades players from doing or appreciating some of the very things that make it special in the first place. It wasn't settling for the past 3 Paper Mario games that finally got them a 1000-Year Door remaster at the end of this recent direct. It was that constant hope and want that Paper Mario would in some way go back to the creative ideas, mechanics, and narratives that people loved about the first 2 games. It wasn't settling for Federation Force that led to Metroid making a resurgence. It was demanding for a proper Metroid Prime game and a proper Metroid comeback as a whole. And look where that got us. Metroid 2 got a proper remake. Prime 4 is still in development, but we still got Prime remastered as a taste for what to expect moving forward, in addition to what is, objectively speaking, one of the best games on the GameCube and one of the best of its console generation, being put out to all new fans and players and veteran players. Metroid Dread probably wouldn't have happened if fans settled for less and didn't want more. That demand made something that was literally impossible actually happen and become a reality. And what we got is one of the best games Nintendo has ever put out. Not just Metroid related, but period. Look at outside of Nintendo. Look at Resident Evil. People got tired of the action-based approach that series took, especially after 6. They wanted the survival horror back. And we got Resident Evil 7. And since then, the franchise as a whole has been thriving better than ever because fans wanted that back. Sonic Frontiers, in a lot of ways, is another one of those dream come true situations. What with the Sonic game finally being written by someone fans actively wanted to take over the game's stories, and to give the series a chance to actually innovate past its traditional 3D framework. This goes for classic Sonic 2. Look at how bad Sonic 4 was. Years later, we have Sonic Mania, and now Sonic Superstars is on the horizon. Modern Warfare 3 is coming out soon with the promise of bringing back a ton of multiplayer staples people have wanted back for years. A traditional minimap, movement canceling, a balanced perk system, and more importantly, a ninja perk. Do I like how they're going about it by putting all of this into a $70 game that was originally going to be an expansion? No, and I've actually already talked about that already on this channel. But my point is, we were still getting these changes because fans asked for these things for so long. And believe me, I'm a pretty avid Call of Duty player. People were practically begging for this stuff to come back to the games. And look at where it got us. F-Zero fans and the franchise deserve so much better than this. They deserve better than to stop hoping for a brand new game altogether. They deserve better than thinking the best they could ever get is a remaster of a game that's 20 years old now, even if it is as fantastic as it is. You could be like me and want a proper F-Zero comeback altogether, or maybe you enjoy F-Zero 99, whether you're a fan or not, and think, wow, I would have loved to play a more traditional F-Zero game. I have friends of my own who have played 99 and have been saying that. And if that's the goal, maybe things are headed in the right direction. If you're like me and are upset with this game happening, I don't need to say much, but if you are enjoying it, use this as an excuse and opportunity to try the other games that are available on Switch Online. Try out the original game on Super Nintendo if you want to know what the game is like when you aren't fighting for your life against 98 other people. Play F-Zero X on Nintendo 64. Yeah, it's not as good or as involved as GX on GameCube was, but it's still a fantastic racing game, let alone the best one on the 64. And unlike GX, X has cheat codes that let you unlock everything, so if you feel intimidated by anything here, you can just do that and just play around with all the different machines, all the different tracks, and all the different game modes and whatnot. Play those games and ask Nintendo for more. I love F-Zero so much. I would not be putting all of my other videos on hold and prioritizing this one here, let alone making this video, if I didn't. My initial reaction to this was having no hope left whatsoever, but I want to still be optimistic. Don't settle for less, want more. And it deserves a new game too, it doesn't need to be innovative to be fun. Like GX here, this game speaks volumes about how much people care about innovation, you know what I mean? This game didn't really need to innovate, it just improved on what X did exponentially, and it's one of the best racing games ever made. The Criterion F-Zero game may have never been a reality, but just imagine if Nintendo outsourced the IP to another racing game studio that specialized in this kind of thing. I don't know, imagine a game that has everything that X and GX had. Grand Prix mode, several racetracks and vehicles to choose from, the time attack modes and death race modes, excuse me. Or hell, maybe even 99's team battle mode can make a return. That's one of the coolest new additions to this series. Bring in vehicle customization and machine customization that GX had. Or maybe this is probably a stretch, but imagine if they brought a map editor like Climax originally had. But beyond all that too, look at what other racing games from the past and even now have done in terms of single player content. Forza Horizon 5. You remember a couple years ago, that game came out on Xbox Series X, and that game was Game of the Year material. People consider that one of the greatest racing games ever made as well. And that game is thriving with single player content in this semi-open world where you can do pretty much anything you want. And Forza's not even the only one that's done this. The Crew did this before. Midnight Club has done this. Hell, right next to GX, I'm not going to pull it out now because I don't want to ruin my whole setup here, but Need for Speed Most Wanted is one of the first things that initially comes to mind. That game has one of the best single players in any racing game I've ever played, if not possibly ever. It's neck and neck with this game. Imagine having an F-Zero game that has that kind of content. Imagine having a single player with some sort of central driving hub or area, or yes, I'll say this even is a little bit blasphemous to say, in 2023, but imagine open world F-Zero, something like that. Imagine something like Most Wanted's open world single player, but with F-Zero. Imagine completing speed-based challenges or time attack challenges in an open world like this. Imagine having street races in an F-Zero game, something like Most Wanted or a lot of Need for Speed games do, just full-on street racing with F-Zero vehicles at F-Zero speed. How cool would that be? Imagine having some kind of sandbox where people can just do whatever the hell they want, in something like Midnight Club's open world. It doesn't even have to be one huge world. F-Zero has all of these cool locales and planets that they can utilize perfectly for several smaller open world areas. Imagine, we have a bunch of different central hubs, and one is Mute City, one is Port Town, one is Red Canyon, one is Big Blue. That's just to name a few of them. I'm definitely getting ahead of myself, and some of this was scripted, but there was other bits that were just totally unscripted, speaking from passion. But my point is, F-Zero is capable of so much more than just being this Battle Royale game that Nintendo may or may not drop at any given moment. Oh, man. Okay, anyways, that's all I have to say. I'm kind of tired. I just wanted to get this off my chest. Like I said, I know a lot of this is probably like very disjointed, has all of my positive and initial negative thoughts about this game kind of mixed into a blender. There's probably no cohesion to it whatsoever. But I wanted to get this off my chest because, you know, I love this franchise. This is one of my favorite games of all time. Like, I needed to get this out there. I wanted to talk about it. And hopefully, you know, a video like this can eventually somehow lead to, I don't know, like, not even just a GX remaster, but like, even just a proper game, you know? Like, I don't know, maybe that's, I don't know what the purpose of the video is. I don't know if it's just me wanting to ramble on about F-Zero in like a negative way. I don't know if it's just because I wanted an excuse to talk about what is one of my favorite game franchises of all time. Like, I know a lot of this is very, very unscripted. Like, I have a script like on display in the background, but like, there is a decent bit here that's unscripted. So maybe it was, I don't know, just an excuse so that I could talk about a franchise I love and that I'm very passionate about. But that's all I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna end it there. If you did like what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I make reviews and editorials like this for games, movies, shows, and music. Definitely a lot more scripted than this one is here, and definitely a lot more, I guess, streamlined and not as loose like this one is. My next video is going to be a lot more straightforward and positive. And yeah, I feel like if I ramble on too much, I'm just going to be completely off script and have no idea what to talk about. So I'm just going to end it there. I'll see you guys in the next video.